We're coming to you from Wajak Noongar and I'd like to pay my respects to the elders past and present, and extend that respect to the countries that everyone else is joining us from today. So, would help if I was using the right slides. Got a really fun setup today. So my name is Shakara Little Hunt. I am Yamaji, but I've lived on Noongar country all my life, and I'm a research assistant at the Telethon Kids Institute. This is Beth, who I'll let introduce herself.
Beth Ewing. I'm a Noongar woman and researcher on the Walkern Katadjin project, based here at Kulbadi Aboriginal Centre at Murdoch University, but also with Telethon.
Amazing. So I'm just going to step over that. We're presenting today about a study called Walkern Katadjin, which is Rainbow Knowledge in Noongar, which is interested in the mental health and social emotional well-being of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander LGBTQA+, so lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, queer questioning, asexual, or kind of somewhere else within that non-straight, non-cisgender identities. And young people aged 14 to 25, kind of that intersection. Because we know that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander young people, LGBTQA+ young people are kind of both at increased risk of poor mental health. And so we're really interested in understanding what kind of occurs at the intersection, because there's not really any existing data about that. So the research study that we did consists of three phases. The first being a series of yarning groups and interviews that we did in 2019 and 2020, which is concluded now. Then this national survey, which is what we'll be talking about today. And then following that, a co-design phase. I'll just point these out. These are the findings from the yarning groups and interviews that we did, which had 14 participants, which were all kind of based here in the Perth metro area. And these are some of the main themes we identified from those interviews. And so they were part of what informed the development of that survey, making sure that, you know, the questions we're asking in the survey are actually informed by what young people think is important. So the survey was hosted primarily online. There was options to do it over the phone or kind of in person with support if young people needed that extra assistance. Recruitment was mainly through social media, particularly paid ads were really, really helpful to us, but also through different, you know, community groups, organisations, Facebook pages, and a lot of word of mouth, definitely. In the end, we recruited 619 young people, which we think is kind of a really good result, given that this is a pretty niche population. And so I'll be running you through some of the initial findings from survey data today, and Beth will also be presenting about some additional work that we're doing that's kind of come out of the findings. And I just want to give you a heads up kind of before we go further that there are some really great, really positive findings, but also some pretty distressing ones. So take care of yourselves if you need a moment. I can't really tell you to leave the room because we're online, but like just be aware. Most of the young people that were recruited were under the age of 18 years, which is definitely interesting. And the majority were Aboriginal, so about 7%. No, that's not right. The majority were Aboriginal, about 7% were Torres Strait Islander, and another 7% were both, which is pretty well representative of population is. Most were from New South Wales, Queensland, Victoria, pretty decent WA representative, which matches up pretty well with the number of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in each state and territory. So that was a pretty good outcome, is that it is pretty representative of what's going on across Australia. In terms of connection to country, it was something that we asked kind of as trying to understand people's social emotional well-being. And the majority said that they were currently living off country, or a very large portion were unsure where their country was. So it's kind of an interesting and maybe upsetting finding that there is a bit of disconnection from country through in the findings. Thanks, Beth. The majority of our participants were women or non-binary people, and about half were trans or gender diverse, which again is a very interesting finding. There's not a lot of work that's been done kind of looking at the unique experiences of trans and particularly non-binary Aboriginal young people. And we've divided it this way based off participant responses, but they were open answer. So you get kind of a lot of complexity coming through about the way the young people are identifying now. So you can just kind of see we've done this word cloud with some of the terms the young people use to describe themselves. Oh, I have changed slides.
Sorry.
Really onto it today. The majority of participants, so about half, identified as bisexual or pansexual, so attracted to multiple genders. Again, about 20% were gay or lesbian. And then we go back.
Sorry.
That's all good. A decent number were also questioning their identity, which, given that it's a sample of young people, we think is pretty fair. And again, we have the same kind of thing around. We let people identify what their sexuality was, just as an open response question. So we've kind of word clouded what some of the responses were there. As you might expect with a majority under the age of 18 sample, most of our young people were living with their parents currently or with other family members. And then some were basically living with partners, share houses. What we were pretty happy to find was that only about 1.5% had no fixed accommodation. The reassuring finding. If we think back to the themes we identified in the interviews, one of the things that was kind of interesting that came through was this idea about visibility. Young people wanting to be able to see other people who are like themselves, who are blackfellas and who are queer. So we asked these questions around, do you feel represented in the media? Do you think it's important? Is it actually important to you? And the majority of young people agreed that they don't see themselves represented very often, but when they do, it was important to them and it made them feel strong in their identity. We were interested in understanding kind of whether young people were accepted by their family, and we got a very positive response from parents and caregivers and siblings. We asked on a scale of like, do you agree that you're accepted, from strongly disagree to strongly agree. So what we've shown here is the number of kind of strongly agree and agree responses. But there were also a lot of neutral responses, particularly from extended family and elders in the community, which is interesting in that it might mean that they're unsure or that it's a mixed reaction. So it's not a negative finding, is kind of what we want to say, that there's more that needs to be done in this space. Again, kind of the same thing of understanding where young people are getting support from, where they feel accepted and where they belong. We asked about what communities young people felt they identified, felt they belonged with, sorry. Again, on the scale of strongly disagree to strongly agree, these are the agree and strongly agree responses. And had very strong feelings that they belonged to an LGBTQ plus community. Were more mixed in terms of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community, and a lot of neutral responses from that one, which is definitely something we'd be interested in kind of working with more. We want people to feel like they belong for obvious reasons. To look at mental health, we assessed using the Kessler-5 scale, which measures psychological distress. So kind of a high score is indicative of a high degree of distress. And unencouragingly, the responses for this one were really high. So most of our young people that above this cutoff of, what's the cutoff, 12? That kind of indicates a high degree of distress, and then a very, again, 77% that in this range of experiencing very high degrees of psychological distress, which is very, very concerning. And this is kind of higher than anything I've seen in other cohorts of young people. as you might expect following that, we asked about lifetime suicide attempts, and 45% of participants responded that they had attempted in their lifetime. Again, this is just so high. If we break that down according to whether participants are trans, which is the blue column, or cisgender, which is green, we can see that young people who are trans and gender diverse were also considerably more likely to have attempted in their lifetime than their cisgender counterparts, which kind of fits with general findings in the LGBTQ plus literature and kind of the idea that a lot of trans and gender diverse people experience higher degrees of discrimination. And that's what causes distress, basically. Breaking that down of the number of young people who attempted in the last 12 months, we still get a pretty high outcome of about 19%. And so we're just kind of breaking it down here between like those who thought about it, those who made a plan, and those who did attempt. What I kind of noticed from these findings, and Bev, you're welcome to interpret it however you like, is that the number from those who considered it and those who made a plan was very high. There's kind of nothing bringing it down in that phase, which I would expect to see with other young people. To be a little bit more positive, because this did. We asked about pride, because that was something that came through pretty strongly talking with young people, was they were very proud to be themselves. And the survey kind of agreed with that most young people strongly agreed that they were really proud to be LGBTQI+, that they were proud to be Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander, and encouragingly, a lot felt that there was a place for that in their Aboriginal communities. Finally, it's just a nice piece. We asked the young people to tell us, what was good about being themselves. And here's just some of the examples. Again, just chosen on the very scientific basis that I liked them and they made me happy. I'll hand over to Beb.
Thanks, Shakara. So moving on to what might actually predict some of these social emotional wellbeing outcomes. This is from a paper that's currently under review. We looked at 7 domains of wellbeing in terms of being connected to community, culture, country, and we had the other domains on the next slide. But what was consistently a predictor of these feeling connected was pride in Aboriginal identity. So the more pride that a young person felt in being Aboriginal, the more likely they'll to feel connected to culture, spend time trying to learn about culture, feel like they belong to their land and their waters, and feel connected to an Aboriginal and an LGBT community. Other things that kind of came through was that acceptance of someone's LGBT identity by elders was something that helped people feel included in the Aboriginal community, but also feeling pride in their LGBT identity helped young people feel included in the LGBT community. And seeing media representation as important helped people feel included in the Aboriginal LGBT community. We also had findings around whether someone was likely to live off country and on country versus not knowing where their country was. So older people, so older youth, those with higher parental acceptance, higher pride in their Aboriginal identity, were more likely to be living on country versus not knowing where their country was. And again, older, sexually diverse people not having a disability, and again, higher acceptance by parents or caregivers meant you were more likely to be living off country, but at least knew where it was compared to not knowing where country was. In terms of connection to family and kinship, we had several measures of family wellbeing. So in terms of family functioning and your family getting along well together, acceptance of siblings and parents for LGBT identity was a positive predictor of that, as well as being proud in your Aboriginal identity. It was a really common predictor. Being trans was associated with lower family wellbeing. So we had some theories around the important role that families play in helping people transition socially and medically, and if that is causing conflict in the family, that might explain lower wellbeing. And then we had mixed findings regarding acceptance of LGBT status from extended family members. So sometimes that could be related to family not getting on as well, but stronger feelings of being connected to kinship. Identity centrality was something that came through in feeling connected to your spirit and your ancestors. So that's how much a young person holds tight both their identities, their LGBT and their Aboriginal identity, and then being important to their sense of self. Again, being older and being proud of Aboriginal identity was linked to stronger spirit. We measured connection to mind and bodies through an inner peace subscale from the growth empowerment measure. Acceptance by parents and community, not being trans, high SES, not having disability, being older, were linked to higher inner peace. So again, some concerning findings for trans youth there. And in terms of connection to body, self-rated physical health was generally pretty average across the sample, and it was only linked to demographic factors, so higher SES and not having a disability. Use of alcohol and drugs, again, only linked to demographic factors, or the ones we'd expect, unstable accommodation. Higher SES was a somewhat surprising finding, and being older and being negatively impacted by alcohol and drug use was only linked to being older. So quickly, I'll go through what the work we're doing alongside Walkern Katadjin, which is the training health providers to work with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander young LGBT young people project, which some people in the session may be aware of. Essentially, this project began a couple of years ago and has undertaken a needs assessment with ARCOs and subject matter experts across Australia to find out around the inclusive practice that's currently happening towards LGBT young people and their families, how staff in our ARCOs and ARCHOs are defining inclusive practice and how we define it as mob, and importantly, what are the training needs of ARCO staff, feeling like if they feel they want to move towards more inclusive practice of LGBT young people. So we've just finished and wrapped up the needs assessment phase, and we're finalising that report, but what we generally found in terms of what people said gaps were a lack of information about LGBT identities that has an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander lens, lack skills gaps in providing gender affirming care, not knowing how to mediate family and community expectations, and possible biases, and minimal organisational support for implementing inclusive practice. We also asked our experts and ARCO staff what our training should look like in the future if we were to co-design a training with them. And we heard things like training should be trauma-informed, connect people with networks across Australia, acknowledge that people's country and contexts are different, so have it embedded within local community for the safety of young people, but also the legitimacy of the training. Use online and offline delivery, tailor it to specific roles, and the power of story and case studies in helping people walk in young people's shoes. So that's some work we'll be hopefully carrying forward with in WA and across Australia over the next year or so to develop some content for that training.
Okay, so just some kind of take-home messages from the entire presentation, and particularly from the findings of the survey, was the young people that we surveyed felt that good representation in the media was important to them, but it didn't happen enough. Most felt accepted by their parents and siblings, which is great. Most felt that they belonged to an LGBTQI+ community, but had more mixed feelings about other communities. They were very proud of their Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander and LGBTQI+ identities, but kind of despite all of these positives, there was still a very high rate of psychological distress and suicidal ideation and attempt, which, again, from what we know from other literature, is very much linked to experiences of depression. And so more needs to be done to support the mental health of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander LGBTQI+ young people, which is why we're really glad to be doing this Training Health Providers project to actually start looking at how our Aboriginal community control services start doing some of that work. Thanks for listening. I think we have time for questions now.
Just going to stop sharing slides so we can see your faces.
Hi guys, thank you so much for that. I had a question that I checked in the chat. On your guys' slide about the breakdown of considered suicide, planned for, or attempted. Were the percentages based on the question above, or were they based on the whole population?
They were based on the question above. Let me double check that for you.
Yeah.
Wait, no. They were based on the whole population, or everyone who answered the initial question about have you considered in the last 12 months. So it was kind of 19% of people who had answered that first, have you had thoughts?
Or have you guys done a breakdown of like those who attempted and then said that they had, those who considered or those who attempted, or have you just done the breakdown population wide?
We do have a breakdown, so I think, let me just double check my notes. Not like that. Of those who had thoughts of suicide in the last 12 months, about 60% had made a plan. Of that 60%, 45% had then attempted.
Wow, thank you.
So yeah, there's not a lot of decrease, which is what we'd
Mm.
expect and what normally happens with young people. Is there's thoughts are pretty common, but the getting to the planning and then the attempt is not so much, and that's really concerning.
Did anyone else have any questions? No? Alright, well, I'll stop recording. And thank you both for coming. It was really great to hear from you. And obviously there's a lot of work that still needs to be done in this space, and I look forward to when it is implemented.
Excellent.
Activities.
Thanks, Katiska. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.